U.S. lawmakers have known since the 1960s that burning fossil fuels, pumping CO2 into the atmosphere, is a recipe for a hotter planet and possible cataclysmic climate change. They, like many around the world, have spent decades denying the science or simply ignoring it. Well, look around the world now. Droughts, flooding, wildfires, melting glaciers, rising sea levels, record-breaking heat waves. Ignoring is no longer an option. Well, the U.S. Congress is now on the verge of passing its most significant legislation in history aimed at combating climate change. The U.S. Senate gave its approval by a 51-50 margin, with Democratic Vice President Kamala Harris casting the tie-breaking vote. Not a single Republican senator voted for the plan, which, in addition to offering tax incentives for reducing carbon emissions, also aims to slash the cost of prescription drugs. The U.S. House is expected to approve the legislation next week. Here is the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer.
As you know, it's been a long, tough, and winding road. At last, we've arrived, and we are elated. Every member of my caucus is elated about what happened because we've changed the world in a way that you rarely get an opportunity to do that. Our bill reduces inflation, lowers costs, creates millions of manufacturing jobs, enhances our energy security, and is the boldest climate package in U.S. history. The Senate has now passed the most significant bill to fight the climate crisis ever.
Some big claims there from Chuck Schumer. Let's go to Washington, D.C. now, talk with our Washington Bureau Chief, Enos Pohl. Good to see you, Enos. Let's help our viewers understand something here. How did efforts to reduce prescription drug prices and efforts to slow climate change, how did they end up in the same legislation?
This piece of legislation, Brent, known as the Inflation Reduction Act, has been in the works for over a year now, but the Democrats were able to muscle it through this weekend after really endless roadblocks. So it might be indeed seem to be an interesting mix of topics, from fighting the climate change to reduce drug prices. The reason for that is the simple fact that the Biden administration had to agree on many, many compromises to get the necessary votes from within its own party.
And we've got Chuck Schumer, as we just heard there, saying that this is the boldest climate package in history, saying that we've changed the world. But I decided to crunch the numbers here. The part of the legislation aimed at fighting climate change is funded by an amount that is not even 5% of the annual U.S. defense budget. So is Congress throwing peanuts at climate change?
Well, I understand that it is kind of appealing to compare these two figures. As one could say, actually, fighting the climate catastrophe is also a huge battlefield. But, Brent, I think we have to be fair here. The original Build Back Better plan was a little over $1 trillion, but it was never going to happen with this Congress and how politicized the political institutions are these days here in the United States. So the U.S. for the first time is making real investments in combating climate change, and I think at least this is a beginning.
Yeah, and in this environment, you make a very good point. You know, we should be glad that we're getting as much as we are getting, considering how the politics are right now on Capitol Hill. Today, China said that it will no longer cooperate with the U.S. on fighting climate change. Now, this is important because the U.S. and China, they're the world's number 1, number 2 emitters of greenhouse gases. I'm wondering, how much do you think this is just Beijing blustering?
Well, the White House has been in a tough position with international challenges like China. Some speculate, actually, that this is potentially the country-puffing chest after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi took the controversial trip to Taiwan. So politically, there is a lot of bipartisanship between the Democrats and the Republicans here in the U.S. in how it views Taiwan and China. But indeed, when it comes to fighting the climate catastrophe, it will be much, much harder, if not impossible, without the cooperation between China and the U.S.
And Enos, you know, this legislation despite its shortcomings, the compromise, despite China's possible hyperbole, I mean, it remains a major political victory for President Biden, doesn't it?
Well, the White House and Senate Democrats have been going back and forth on this major piece of legislation, as we just talked about. So Democrats who are struggling to keep their majority in both houses in the upcoming midterm election can effectively go to voters with really tangible progress, despite an extremely divided Congress. But with the election only months away, Brent, it may be a little bit too late, as many voters have become set in their political view.
All right, TW's Enos Poll with the latest tonight from Washington. Enos, as always, thank you.